Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and this is a Right to Read initiative talk. And in this talk, we're talking to Heather Ballantine from, Roots. Sorry,
No, I work part-time as a literacy coach at the Compass School in Rhode Island in the States. And I also started a company called Root Literacy Design. So yeah, you had two things to keep balanced in your brain, so it's all good.
So from Root Literacy Design, and today we're talking about the Compass School's journey. And so they've hired you as a consultant to help them bridge the gap, right, between...
No, I work here part-time, so I'm not hired as a consultant here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll let you do the introduction. Let's rewind, start that again. So hello, my name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and this is the Right to Read initiative and the Compass School's journey. Today, I have Heather Ballantine joining me, and she's going to be talking about their journey to more of a structured literacy approach. So thank you for joining me. Do you want to give us a little bit more information about yourself?
Sure. I've been in education over 10 years. I've worked as a high school and middle school English teacher. I'm a licensed reading specialist in 2 states, Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And I have been a literacy coach for over 5 years. I've kind of lost count. But yeah, I started a company 3 years ago called Root Literacy Design just because I wanted to help educators build evidence-based practices aligned to the science of reading and writing in their classrooms. As I worked in different settings, I realized that that was a high need. And so I work part-time at the Compass School, which is not affiliated with my company, but my company does help other schools through consulting.
Wonderful. So the reason why I asked you on today is because the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read initiative. And there are 3 recommendations that I quickly want to remind everybody who's watching about what the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read initiative or public inquiry recommended. So it's talking about the Ministry of Education working with external experts to develop comprehensive, sustained, job embedded in-service teacher professional learning program and resources that address early reading instruction and reading disabilities or dyslexia, and lists a variety of topics that it needs to include. It also states that the ministry should work with external experts to mandate and standardize evidence-based interventions in word reading accuracy and fluency, with more criteria for that. And the final one is the ministry should work with external experts to mandate standardized evidence-based eligibility criteria to receive reading interventions. Now, these are all things like a consultant like you or myself can help schools do by helping them navigate the process from what they're currently using to one that aligns more with structured literacy and the science of reading and writing.
Exactly.
So can you let us know a little about the Compass School, where they were at when you began and how you took them through the process?
Sure. You just want like a quick recap?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So the Right to Read Act was passed in Rhode Island in 2019, and I was hired in 2020 to come to the Compass School and help them align to the Right to Read Act and change the literacy practices that happen here. A lot has happened in a year and a half since I've been here, but the first stages that we went through was I just had to figure out what was happening, what practices were being utilized, teacher knowledge, administration knowledge, that sort of thing. Then we had to make a plan. So we made a literacy action plan and we started acting that out. And that's it, put very simply.
Yeah. So what type of literacy program was the Compass School using when you were first hired? Like, was it how a lot of schools are more leaning towards that balanced literacy with a program like Fountas and Pinnell?
There was some Fountas and Pinnell stuff here, yeah. And definitely balanced literacy practices, workshop model, that type of thing, although Lucy Calkins wasn't used, but that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, that's what teachers are really trained in when they go to school, or they're not trained at all. So they fall to whatever curriculum is out there for them. And this is a place too, it's a charter school, so it's really homegrown curriculum. So people were making their own things when I got here. And now we're starting to shift to getting curriculum aligned to the science of reading.
Yeah, and while teacher autonomy is a very important aspect of teaching, teachers need guidance and to realize what they need to address. I know with our math curriculums, there are standards, right? You're expected to teach the kids the numbers 1 to 100. They need to recognize, they need to add, subtract. And that's a similar thing that we need to make sure that kids do with reading and writing, making sure that they understand the letters or the graphemes and the phonemes that they represent, and have the awareness that they need that can be likened to number sense. And kids don't necessarily come to the school with that knowledge, so we need to make sure that it's provided for them.
Right. Yep, it's a very structured approach too. It should be very explicitly taught and nothing left up for kids to figure out on their own. One practice that's kind of misunderstood is literacy centers, where it's like, if I put games out, kids will kind of figure things out. So there's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with literacy centers, but implementing them after explicit instruction and after kids have been guided, it's a great way to continue practice, but it's not something that you want to use to teach a concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, we don't want to leave it up to chance, because there's some kids that are not gonna get that concept from doing the activity, and they're going to be a little bit lost in the activity.
Right.
So one of the things is in Canada, like across Canada, and a lot of places, it's not explicitly to Canada, and the recommendations from this report do apply to schools around the world, really, as a step-by-step way that we can help move from a balanced literacy approach of reading instruction to a more structured literacy and science of reading and writing based method. So I remember you saying that one of the ways that you started was just conferencing with the entire school to try and see where they were at. How did that look?
Yeah, so it wasn't done in a day. It was done over several months. I went and did observations. I watched, it's important not to just go through a teacher's room one time. It doesn't really give you a clear picture of what's going on. So I tried to hit every classroom multiple times and just sit in the back and kind of take in what I was seeing. I also conducted surveys, and I used that data primarily to help me understand teachers' knowledge and practices.
Right. And then once you had that initial assessment, or the screening, if we liken it to what we're doing with our students, you were able to get an understanding of where everybody was at, so that you could kind of fill in the gaps, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
And then you went on to doing some professional development.
Yep. Once I understood where teachers were, I understood where I needed to go. And every teacher has a different amount of knowledge, but you want to pick out the major trends and things that you're seeing across the board, and not single out one teacher or one classroom, because that's not going to get the most bang for your buck. So you want to make sure that professional development is geared toward what everybody needs. So while I saw minor differences in practices, the major pieces of understanding were what I wanted to start to build. And so I started, introducing Scarborough's rope and the simple view of reading, and walking teachers through actual assessments of students that I had taken, showing that, even though this student is coming up on an iReady screener as reading at the 8th grade level, he actually can't read words. He reads by memorizing. And so I had, nonsense word lists, and showing him trying to sound them out, and he couldn't do it. And that kind of stuff was just blowing their minds, where they were like, I had no idea that reading by memorizing was even a thing. I was like, yep, it is. And we have to look out for it. And then, walking them through the dangers of that and why that's a problem. And it really got teacher buy-in, because teachers are all about their children and they want to do what's best for their students. And so that's the place I always try to lead from, is from the kids themselves.
Well, and I think it's important to note that the vast majority of teachers out there went through their teacher education programs where none of this was covered. I know it wasn't covered in my teacher education program and even my master's and Ph.D. It was stuff that I've gone out and learned. The information is available out there if you look for it, but we shouldn't be putting teachers in a position where they have to go out and search for this information on their own time, looking at, teachers pay teachers. And while there are wonderful support groups out there, it's really important to take a systematic approach to this.
Yeah, it's also, I wouldn't recommend a teacher trying to figure out the science of reading on their own ever. It is so hard to navigate. It's so overwhelming. There's so much out there that's wrong. I was helping with curriculum adoption last year, and there was a company that was completely balanced literacy. Like, I could go in and highlight aspects of this program that were balanced literacy, and then they had a document that they're sending out because the new buzzwords are science of reading. So they made a document that shows how science of reading is present in their curriculum. And so because I'm so involved in this, I can look at that and I can see the flaws and I can be like, no, that's not accurate. But somebody who doesn't have that background or that knowledge, like, they would never know. They would read that and go, oh, it's aligned to the science of reading, not their fault. But, that's just, you have to understand too, not everything. It's about like companies want to keep selling. So now they're trying to, keep up with the pace of things, and everyone wants the science of reading. So they're trying to show they do the science of reading. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And there's Facebook groups that there's comments on there that, they're not really science of reading based, but it's what someone was trained in. So they think it is. And so it's just hard to navigate, and you just have to keep an open mind and be willing to learn, unlearn, relearn, all those things. And be like, oh, I was told this, but I was wrong. Oh, I've practiced this for 5 years the wrong way. Cool. I'm going to do it this way now. Like, you really just have to be willing to be flexible and open-minded. So.
Yeah, and when we enter the teaching profession or even life, it's really lifelong learning. We can't expect to do, the one-room schoolhouse or, the traditional model of schooling where you teach one lesson to all students and expect them to come out of it with the same level of learning. We now have the knowledge about how the brain learns how to read, and we need to make sure that teachers understand it so that they can reach their students at that level that they need to be met at, instead of expecting them to figure out on their own.
Mm-hmm. And coaching is so important because, even if you learn, let's say like you learn the syllable division types, like how to divide words by syllables and read them and that sort of thing. Just because you now know, oh, I can take multisyllabic words and I can divide them into syllables and I can read them. How do you teach that to kids? Like, how do you bring that to practice? At what age is it appropriate? How do you begin? What does that look like? How do you make it cumulative? So it's like constant review. How do you model it? Like, all those questions then swarm into a teacher's brain. They get so excited about, oh my gosh, I'm learning something new and this is so great. And their brain immediately goes to, as it should, this is helpful for my kids. How do I do it? And so the how do I do it piece is really the piece that you need to be part of a community for, whether it's working with a coach or a professional learning community where you're guiding one another and learning together with experts present to help you out. But yeah, it can feel very daunting. Like, the more you learn, it's like, oh my gosh, how do I do it? And it can feel overwhelming.
Well, and there's so many great webinars and book clubs and everything out there that you can fall into the trap of signing up for them all and trying to do them all at once. And it's just overwhelming. A lot of the research is saying that it takes about 5 years to do the full transition from a balanced literacy to a structured literacy approach. And you have to realize and accept that it's not going to be an overnight process. And you're going to have to, trial and error a couple of things to see how it works best for you. And as long as you're meeting the core criteria, there is a little bit of wiggle room for how you can do things. Exactly. Like when you're teaching phonemic awareness, there are different activities that you can use to do so, as long as you're working on phonemic awareness.
Right. There's like finger tapping, and there's Alconin boxes and like moving pieces so kids get movement. And yeah, there's definitely various ways to do things. We just want to make sure we're do, like practicing phonemic awareness is a perfect example. Like that's something that research has shown is very important for reading and spelling. There's different ways to do it. There's not one way that works for everybody, but we do want our students to be practicing phonemic awareness. Yeah, so that was a great example.
So you went into a whole school situation, and when we're, for schools that are looking at doing that sort of thing, it's important to realize that you have to be flexible in your implementation. In the sense, you're not necessarily going to start at the lowest grades and then move your way up. You said that you started actually in the middle school grades.
Yeah. So the goal is the goal, right? Which is that everybody is shifting and learning and growing. And how you do it is different in every setting. There isn't a one size fits all package. So how it worked here was our 5th and 6th grade teams, the teachers just happened to be ahead of everybody else. They had all their students assessed. I had made assessment flowcharts that did not involve Countess and Pinnell. So it was all new ones that I had to train them in. So it was training the teachers in how to deliver the assessments. We actually sat side by side with them and coached them and modeled it, and they'd stare at me and be like, did I do that right? Did I pronounce that right? I'm like, yep, you're good, keep going, to the point where I got them independent, that they felt like they could administer these assessments without me present. And so I was doing that with all grades. Grades 5 and 6 just moved faster. I got to spend more time with them. And so they had all their students assessed first. And so it was like, why are we going to wait for K1? 5, 6 is ready. Like, let's go. So 5, 6 had a day-to-day before the rest of the school, where we looked at the student data, analyzed what we saw as trends, started to form RTI groups and goals. And yeah, someone from the outside might be like, why'd you start with grades 5 and 6 and not K1? It's just, K1 was doing it. They just did it a month later with me. Grades 5 and 6 were ready. That's why, it just worked out that way.
Well, when you think about it, the beginning of the school year for K1 is a lot about getting routines and expectations met. But by the time that they're in the grade, 5, 6, the middle school grades, they kind of have that established. So the teacher has more time to focus on it. And let's take a little bit of a minute to talk about those screening assessments that you're doing. What is the point of them? Why do we screen our students?
One of the main ways to think about it is it's a fishing net. So you're kind of capturing the students that you might not notice have reading difficulties if you didn't put that net out. And then once you figure out the students that need more assessment, you dive deeper. So going back to the example of the student I showed who on the iReady screener, which iReady is just on the computer and clicking buttons. And so you can guess, you can, there's a lot of things that can happen when you do an online assessment. So on that, he wasn't showing as a student to be concerned about, because he's in middle school and it said, hey, like 8.2 grade reading level. And everyone went, okay, cool, he's good. And I was like, yeah, you can't just rely on one assessment. You need to have multiple screeners. And so we used a screener that was nonsense words. And I sat with all the students and did that with them, and eventually trained the teachers in that screener too. And then we implemented spelling screeners too. So just, those things are important. Just because you can read doesn't mean you can spell. There's many people who are great readers and claim to have a hard time spelling, because it's a completely different area of the brain and different rules that you need to learn. And so we implemented those 3 main screeners for our students in grades 3 to 8, and we captured a lot more in our net.
Yeah, and these screeners aren't long. They're meant to be quick snapshots, right? So that nonsense word fluency task that you do.
That's a minute to 2 minutes.
Yeah, depending on the skill of the student. But it can be really diagnostic, especially as teachers learn more about what they're looking for, because they can see where the student is having the errors and understand, oh, okay, well, they don't understand this part or that part.
Right.
And at the beginning, you're not going to have necessarily that ability to get so much information from it. But once you're more familiar with how the English language works and what the student errors mean, you can definitely use it to help inform your intervention at a deeper level.
Yes. Yep, and those, we started with those, and the flowcharts had, you know, if you see deficits or students struggling, then go here and do these assessments. If they're still struggling, then go here and do these assessments. So, you know, the screeners were solid enough that I felt like if they're getting everything spelled right and they're reading every nonsense word correctly, and iReady is like a high score, it's safe to say that they're a pretty good reader. But if they are bombing all of those pieces or bombing a couple of them, maybe their iReady is really high, but their nonsense word screener is showing a lot of deficits and their spelling is pretty off. We want to learn more about that student. And so then we do other assessments with them to see, like, do you know the sounds of digraphs? Do you know all the short vowel sounds? Can you identify all the letters of the alphabet? You know, you can go as deep as you need to figure out what the kid knows and what they need.
Yeah, I know that I've had several examples where I've been working with students, and even in, you know, those grade 4, 5, 6, they still struggle to actually print the alphabet in all, like in all lowercase or all uppercase. And the teachers just assumed they had that skill. Yep. And didn't realize that the struggle was there. And it's really important that we get our students to that level of automaticity. So yeah, it's like a response. They don't have to think about it to form those letters.
Right.
Now, once we have the screening information, then we're going to try and move into that RTI or MTGSS model. Can you discuss that a little bit in more detail?
Yeah, sure. So once we had all of the information about our students and we had different information for each kid, you know, a handful, we wanted to learn more. We did even more assessments for them. So then it was like sifting through them and figuring out what do the majority of our students show that they need and what are the needs of a select few and can we group them at all? Do they have any similarities in common? And so we actually came up with a list of tier 1 goals to happen for all students that all students needed. And then we came up with 12 students were identified as needing very specific, like short vowels, vowel consonant E. They needed syllable types. They were really struggling. They were just looking at the first part of a word and then guessing at it. So, you know, the word basket might be, I don't know, anything with a B, bridge, or they would just see the B and just say something, or, you know, they were using visual cues to help them. And so we were able to form our tier 2 goals and groups based on that. And if there were any outliers, like students who needed individual letters or anything like that, like they didn't know the sound of B versus D or anything like that, then we made them tier 3 and they would get intensive one-to-one support, or they were just getting different instruction than the students were getting in tier 2 and tier 1.
Yeah, and so the screening measures that you're using are different for each grade because you expect a different set of skills to be understood and mastered at that stage. And
yeah. And we used, I'm still developing the K1-2 charts because we're in curriculum exploration / adoption. We're hoping to adopt a curriculum by the end of this year for those grades. But the curriculum we get is going to have assessments built into it that I'm going to want to dive into and see, you know, learn more about. And so I've just been holding off, but the IDA, the International Dyslexic Association, has put out what should be screeners for students in K1 and 2. And so I need to make sure, you know, if that's not present in the curriculum, then we need to make sure that it's present elsewhere, that I outsource those. So yeah, it's interesting because the flowcharts end up almost flipping. So like for an older student, you're looking at, you know, comprehension and fluency, and if you have to, you go all the way down to like, do they know the alphabet and the sounds of the letters? Like, do they know the phonemes for the graphemes? But when you're in K, that's where you begin. So like you start with the alphabet, you start with sounds of letters and such. And so that's helpful in a sense too. It's the same skills. It's just the foundation that everything builds upon. So you're hoping to get higher and higher in the house, but you know, if they don't have the 3rd floor, then you got to go down to the basement and build the basement so that they can get up that high. So the assessment flowcharts, it's not that they're different, it's just the organization ends up shifting. The bottom becomes the top becomes the bottom, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're in your 2nd year of doing this with the school, is that correct?
I'm in my 2nd year at the Compass School, yeah.
Yeah, so what are the differences between the 1st year and the 2nd year as far as teacher buying it in, and are they seeing the results?
Yeah, I just had a great meeting yesterday with two teachers who teach 3rd and 4th grade. And they were like, Heather, last year we were talking to you about how our students would take an hour to read a page and it takes forever to get through a paragraph. We have to stop and talk about the meaning of every single word. And, we didn't know what was going on. And now they're at the point where like, we know what's going on. We're doing the instruction. We see our kids growing. And so the teachers feel really empowered, and the students too. They're seeing a difference in their students, and they're holding their students accountable for what they're learning, which is so great. So like their students just learned fat cat, skinny kitty, like when do you use a C versus a K when you hear at the start of a word. And so now every piece of writing that they do, the teachers hold them accountable. Like if they have the word, kick or something, they've learned how to spell with CK at the end after a short vowel. They know when to use a K. And so the teacher will just like circle the word if they spelled it wrong and be like, go check the wall for the rule and fix the word. You know how to do it. And so it's really fascinating. Then the students will like come back and be like, I did it. And, you can see them. They're taking more of an interest in their writing. Some students that, not exaggerating, they would like bang their heads because you asked them to write a paragraph and they were like, just start going like this. And they're like, I can't write a sentence. And it's like, oh my goodness. Now we have students who are starting to write stories and give them to the teachers just because they feel empowered, like they can write. And so they're doing it more. So it's a great place to be. And this is always my favorite part, is when you start to see it happening in the classroom, because now the teachers are, they were bought in, but now that they see the results, like they're not going back. There's no going back to balanced literacy after this. So that's a great feeling for me. I don't have to worry about that. So yeah, it's been a great journey.
Of course. And a lot of people don't realize that there is more of a logic to English than meets the eye. And once you understand some of the rules and why things are done the way they are, it really is like that aha moment, and you're able to be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And the more that we're able to teach our students and make it so they understand why something is done, not just because I said so,
right?
It gives them a lot more freedom and liberty to use the language and have those opportunities where they know a word and they can do a pretty good guess at a phonetic spelling of the word based on the rules that they know. And while they still make some small errors, they're not as big as if they just don't know what they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, there's some words that you just can't spell wrong if you know the rules, like the word running. Like if you're adding a suffix that starts with a vowel, you always double the consonant. There's got to be one. I guess I don't have to go into it. It's a doubling one rule if anyone's interested. But then there's words, like make, M-A-K-E, M-A-I-K. Which one is it? So that's more about the cognitive approach. So you just teach students the two spellings, and then it's which one looks right, or you check a dictionary. But that is far more effective than them just randomly writing anything and having no idea of how to spell the word make, so it gets it down to 2, and 2 is much more plausible to figure out, or maybe spell check will catch it for you. But that's a lot more helpful. And I just happen to have this book next to me. This has been so helpful for me. Just want to show it if anyone wants. It's a quick read. It's only about 150 pages or so, but it does have all the rules of English. And I learned so much reading this. I read it last summer and I was blown by, I'm still learning all this stuff. It's a lot.
It is. And I find also if you're able to put a little bit of time and investment into looking at the etymology of words and understanding those relationships, like come and came is a perfect example, where it's not comb and came. The E at the end of come is there to show the relationship to came and not that vowel consonant E long vowel.
Mm-hmm. Or going into the history of words, a lot of the Anglo-Saxon words, they were just pronounced differently before. So I could be wrong. This is in my head. I think I read this, that the word said was actually pronounced as said before. But we've changed the pronunciation, but we've held on to the spelling. And so that's that's a part of it too. There's so many, it's really fascinating. You learn a lot about history too when you study the language, and kids find that interesting as well. So
Yeah, well, and then another way to look at the word said is dividing it into its morphemes. So it's say plus the suffix ed. And you can't change the Y to an I and add ED, because AIED is not a legal orthographic pattern in the English language.
Yep.
So it's SA, you change the I to a Y, but you don't add the E, you just add the D.
Yep. Another thing she goes into in this book a little bit is if you look at lay to laid, say to SAID, like it starts to match, the spelling starts to match, if you look at the present to the past tense. So yeah, there's so many this is just proof right here. There's so many different reasons we have this spelling, and one will stick in a kid's brain if you talk about it with them. So it's talking about the language and having these conversations about the language and looking for patterns, and oh, lay to laid, say to said, but it's spelled the same, but we pronounce it differently. Like that's going to help the child remember how to spell said instead of doing SED or something to make it phonetic, which I see I'm sure many people who will watch this have seen that before.
Yeah, and the thing to note is you're not expected to learn all of this at once. It does take time, but those little factoids, you'd be surprised how they stick in those little brains and they remember them for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I remember stuff my second grade teacher taught me for spelling. It's crazy. And most teachers I talk to, they can recall little tidbits that their teachers taught them. And I'm like, yeah, now you're the one who's putting that in your kid's head. And they're like, oh, so it does stick for sure.
Yeah, and with that logic of English, I know, like I have an e-book of it off of Amazon, and it even has all the rules already. It has the most often highlighted sections available for you to see.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like a quick reference guide is wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, when you
out all the time, I'm using it. It's next to me because I was building something for a teacher, and I refer to it all the time. That's good.
Yeah, and it gives us a lot of understanding and knowledge, and really helps the kids because they can hold a lot more information than you realize. And sometimes those little like factoids about the spelling patterns help cement it in that orthographic mapping that they need, or that visual word form area, so that they can automatically recognize the word and realize what it means and what it says. Now, when you first went into the school, you said it kind of had the Fountas and Pinnell feel. What did you do with all the resources? Like, was there a big shift in what they were using, or how did you approach that way with the resources available?
So part of my professional development, what I did was I took out Fountas and Pinnell. I'm not going to get rid of it. I think it's a great, as I continue to hold teacher trainings and we onboard new staff, I don't know their backgrounds and who's going to be coming in. So, you're tempted to just get it out. I've heard some teachers say, let's have a bonfire, and, not necessarily teachers here, but, in other circles. And so it's like, that's so tempting. But I think it's great to show why, show the why does it not work? And so when I had the professional development with them, we looked through the leveled readers, and once they saw scope and sequence and they understood decodable text, then they looked at the level readers, and there's sentences like, the girl sat next to the giraffe at the circus, and they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. G is saying J, C is saying S, and it's got two sounds here. Like, our kids don't know that yet. Like, what? And I'm like, exactly. This is a leveled book, though. Like, and then I'm like, what? So we had conversations about different type of text, leveled versus connected versus decodable versus predictable. Looked at examples of each. What's the purpose and use for each? Why would you utilize them, if ever? And so that was really valuable. So it's tempting to just get rid of it, but I think people need to understand the why and why it doesn't work, and always bring it back to the classroom. So, once they understood scope and sequence and decodable, I said, when would you use level books? And they were like, I don't think I would. I was
Yeah,
like, well,
you can
know,
use some of those higher leveled books once students
once
are,
students can read, you can put them in your classroom library,
yeah,
but the idea of like, you got to get to level F before
yeah,
you can move on and that sort of thing. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It
no.
doesn't really make sense. And so that's actually what one teacher did, was she took her Fountas and Pinnell set and she just scattered the books through her classroom library. But hers, it was, she's in a higher classroom. I wouldn't recommend doing that for kindergarten.
Well, no, and those predictable texts are not doing our students any favors. And they're not doing you any favors either as a teacher, because when you get the student reading those books and practice reading those books, they can figure out the sentence starter fairly quickly and then figure out what word from guessing.
Yeah, and that's the trick too, is they're not actually reading. Like my 3-year-old niece can look at brown bear, what did you see? And she knows every single every page is going to start with brown bear, what did you? And so she can do that, and it's not reading. And so, my sister-in-law was like, oh, she's reading. I'm like, she's not reading, she's just memorizing. If we took the word brown off that page and I wrote it on a piece of paper and I held it up to her, she wouldn't be able to read it. But she knows brown bear, what did you see? It's just predictable. And so, and there's a time and a place for it. It's not that that's a bad book. It's just not how someone's going to learn how to read. It's fun. It's usually got rhyming. It's a great story, but not appropriate for a kid to learn how to read.
Definitely. Wonderful. So are there any other recommendations that you would have to a school that's trying to make this transition, like the best way to start, and anything that you've learned along the way with the different schools that you've worked with so far?
Yeah, I think a big piece is, this is all about people. And so it's very tempting to just tell people what to do, but that's not how humans function. Nobody wants to be told what to do. And teachers are intellectual and they need to be respected for that. So it's not looking at somebody who's doing balanced literacy and being like, oh man, like, there's really should be no judgment or anything like that. It's really just like, we're all in this together, we're all learning together. And that needs to be what drives us as the students. And usually when you look at the data, it matches the practice that's happening in the school. So balanced literacy schools usually are aware that their students are struggling to read and that they need some help with it. And so that's a good place to start. And I love what you said before with the 5-year thing in mind and taking it slow. And I just want to reiterate what you said there. It's so important to understand that you're not going to go to 0 to 100 in a year. So you need to take baby steps, and you need to have goals and outline them and be working on those pieces together and do one thing really well before you take on something else. It's so tempting to abandon what you've started and just jump onto another ship, but it's not going to go anywhere. So that's another thing that's very tempting too. People start to get into it and they're like, okay, we understand this, now let's do this. And I'm like, nope, we're actually not finished. We need to finish the road that we're traveling and then go to another road. So having someone who kind of keeps that accountability in place of like, what's our evidence that we actually reached our destination, and then move on once you've reached it.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely that no shame thing. I think one thing that I like highlighting is a lot of the experts that we look to for advice and information have said, look, you know what, when I went through my teacher education program, I didn't get this either.
Yep.
It's
yep.
Understanding that our foundation as teachers and educators isn't as solid as we had hoped. And I know, myself and several of the people in my cohort and other new teachers that I spoke to are like, well, we don't know what to do. We weren't given that instruction. This is how you teach a child how to read. This is what you do once they are reading. And we can't assume that that's going to happen on their own. It's not magic. Right? That exposure to wonderful text yes, you create that love and desire, but it doesn't mean that it's just going to happen through osmosis. And one thing that I forgot to mention when you were talking about, those intermediate grades that you were working with, is that 3rd and 4th grade brick wall, where we see the students who looked like that they could read during the primary grades, where they had those predictable texts and easier text where they could use the memory and the pictures to get them where they could seem like they were reading. And then as soon as we make that switch to more academic texts and the reading to learn, that's where we see that struggle. And with the approach that we're trying to shift towards, we're trying to prevent as much of that brick wall as we can.
Exactly. Yeah, that was really well said. The brain can also memorize a certain amount of words. It's a few thousand. I used to know the exact number. I read a lot and then it jumbles in my brain, but your brain maxes out at a certain point. It can only memorize so much. And so that tricks us too. So we have a 2nd grader reading at a 5th grade level, but we do a nonsense word screener and she completely bombs it. She doesn't know short vowel sounds. She doesn't know vowel consonant, vowel teams, like nothing. Teacher looks at me and goes, how is this happening? I'm like, she's reading by memorizing. She's memorized these words because certain words stay present in those lower level texts. But then once you reach that middle school range, all these new words come in, right? Especially morphology comes in. And so the brain just cannot memorize anymore, just can't do it. And so what's your attack strategy to figure out these new words if you don't know how to read them? You don't have one. And so then you max out and then the parents are confused. Teachers are confused. What happened? This child was reading at a 5th grade level in 2nd grade. What happened? What happened? And so everyone wants to try to figure out what happened. Well, the child was never really reading. The child was memorizing. And so that's why it's really important to have multiple screeners and not just do something like a STAR test or an iReady or AimsWeb or something like that. AimsWeb, I think, does have a nonsense word component to it. So that might not be a good example, but you want to make sure that you have that component so that you can tell what's going on for the child.
It's hard on the child too, because they're told they're such a good reader and they're doing so well, and they truly believe they are reading.
Yeah.
And languages,
and they're like, wait, what? What do you mean sound it out?
Exactly. It just says that. I don't know why, but it does.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to accept. And when we get to those more academic texts, that's when the spelling patterns and the orthography gets more complex, especially when we see the words that have Greek and Latin bases. Because one thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is the alphabet was different at that point. So we don't have the same number of letters. So that's why we have things like PH representing the phoneme, because they didn't have the letter F.
It's fascinating too. So you just taught me something. I actually had a student ask me the other day, why do we have PH? And I was like, I don't know. I have more research to do. I mean, you're just constantly learning in this, but that's what makes it so fun. And I think that's another important piece when you're leading this work is when you're working with teachers, it doesn't go well to be like, I know everything and, follow me. Like I am on this journey with them. And I think they feel that. And that's a reason why we really are all in this together. If I don't know something, I just say I don't know, and I'll try to find out, and no one's offended or upset or thinks, wow, Heather doesn't know what she's doing. And I think that's a piece of this is that we feel like we should know this already, and we just kind of have to let that go. We have to let it go and just be learners with our kids. When kids say, why is PH, there instead of the letter F? I don't know. Why don't we find out? Let's look it up. Just make it like an exploration. Take the pressure off of ourselves. That'll make it more fun.
Well, and there's great resources like Etymology Online.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Etymology dictionaries that you can get and you can look. And the other thing that is really important is connecting the spelling and the reading instruction together. So often I see classrooms with these, well thought out spelling programs. where they focus on one phoneme and the different representations for spelling that phoneme. But the teacher doesn't put the time to have the explanation for why that happens. Or, for example, looking at one where you're teaching the PH or the phoneme and trying to decide whether it's the PH or the letter F, and then looking at things like paragraph and telephone. We'll take the opportunity to explain those morphemes. What does graph mean?
Yep.
And photograph. Like, these are things that if you take that extra time to put that little bit of extra instruction in, maybe not every student is going to grasp it, but some of your higher students will, and then they'll take that information from the morphology and be able to use it later on.
Yep. Very important piece. A lot of people focus on phonics, but English is a morphophonemic language. So, you know, it's a large part morphology and phonics. So you have to, if you ignore one, it's not gonna be as strong as it could be. Ignoring one, you might as well ignore both.
Morphology trumps phonology, right?
They're both very important, but morphology brings in
extremely
pronunciation and meaning.
Yeah, but if there is a morpheme in the word, the spelling for that morpheme is going to go over.
Oh, that's what you meant.
Phonology for the morpheme, right?
Yep. Yeah. Pronunciation will come from the history of the word or the morpheme, the meaning of it. Yeah.
And then when we're working on these programs, try and have appropriate books available that are reinforcing those sounds. And that's where the decodable texts come in, and controlled texts.
Yep.
So thank you so much for joining me today, Heather.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed our conversation. Everybody watching, make sure you take an opportunity to like and follow the Right to Read Initiative Facebook group. And if you are interested in connecting with me to do a conversation like this, I'd love to hear from you. So everybody have a great day.